session is a part of our ongoing efforts under the Open Societies Foundation with a project that we have with them, which is really aimed at educating and training local communities as well as legal professionals about things related to the environment, specifically, however, climate change, climate litigation, and which is relatively new to the Caribbean. Today's webinar, it builds on discussions that we had in March 2024 with our inaugural session on climate litigation, which was the emergence and viability of climate litigation within the Jamaican legal framework. We will be focusing today on what we're calling the Bonaire Case Study, which is a Caribbean example of climate litigation and examining how communities and not-for-profits in Bonaire have been using the law to address climate challenges. And we'll also explore how climate litigation might be applied here in Jamaica, the unique challenges that are faced by small island developing states and the efforts of island nations in these kind of international forums. So I will now hand over to Courtney, who will introduce our guest speaker.
And thank you so much for joining us. So our guest speaker today is Miss Maria Alejandra Serra. So Miss Serra is the legal counsel at the Greenpeace. So she's Greenpeace International Legal Counsel, and she's also a climate specialist for the Climate Justice and Liability campaign. At Greenpeace International, she advises on the development and implementation of climate strategic litigation and international biodiversity law to hold governments and corporations accountable for environmental destruction resulting in human rights violations. Currently, Maria Alejandra is providing strategic legal advice in several cases across 5 different jurisdictions. For example, she supports the case led by Bonaire residents and Greenpeace Netherlands against the Dutch state, which is what we'll be talking about today. And also the case led by Italian citizens and Greenpeace Italy and the Recomp Common against ENI, the biggest fossil fuel company in Italy. Maria Alejandra has also been co-author of Greenpeace International submissions before international fora, and this year she represented Greenpeace International before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in the advisory opinion of the climate emergency and human rights. So prior to joining Greenpeace International, Maria Alejandra worked in human rights and labor law compliance in Colombia, where she's also a registered attorney. She holds a master's in law in international law and human rights with environmental law specialization from Tilburg University in the Netherlands. It is a pleasure for us to have Maria here to present, and now I'll hand over to Maria.
Thank you so much, Courtney, and thank you, Teresa, and everyone at the Jamaica Environment Trust for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here today and to talk to you about this exciting case in Bonaire, and also about other topics that I think are relevant to the Caribbean context. So let me share my screen. Can you all see my PowerPoint presentation now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, sorry, let me. So as Courtney was saying, my name is Maria Alejandra Serra, and I am legal counsel climate specialist at Greenpeace International. So I think this can be a bit confusing, so I want to clarify this. So Greenpeace is a global network of independent organizations. This means that Greenpeace International is an independent organization from Greenpeace Netherlands, Greenpeace the United States, Greenpeace Canada, Greenpeace Mexico, all independent organizations, but we are part of the same network. And Greenpeace International coordinates the work in iconic campaigns such as the climate campaign. So the different organizations of Greenpeace that have climate strategic litigation work in partnership with Greenpeace International to bring these cases before courts. So in the case of Bonaire, for example, I work with Greenpeace Netherlands and with legal experts from the Netherlands, as I am myself not a Dutch lawyer. And I provide strategic and specialized advice in this case. And Courtney also mentioned that I support the Climate Justice and Liability campaign. And indeed, this is a campaign that works with an intersectional lens and is grounded on strategic litigation, story and narrative interventions, people mobilization, political strategies, communication strategies, all these with the objective of shifting narratives in the public and holding those responsible for the climate crisis accountable, and also to build power in partnership with communities against governments and corporate actors that are failing to act. So I'm going to break this presentation in three sections. The first one, I want to go through climate science and how we're using climate science in international law and strategic litigation. Then I want to talk to you about the case of Bonaire and how the law is being applied by communities in Bonaire and Greenpeace Netherlands, how we're also using climate strategic litigation and a theory of change known as movement lawyering. I'm also going to talk to you about other efforts that are led or supported by island communities and nations before international fora and also at domestic levels. So climate science and international climate law. As many of you, I understand that most of the people joining us today are lawyers. So as you know, evidence and causation are essential to a successful litigation. And when it comes to climate change and the impacts of climate change, science has become the key to understand not only the causes of climate change, but also who is responsible for the current climate crisis, its impacts, and to what degree they are responsible. Sorry, yeah. Okay, so going back to the basics and like super quick, I want to talk about just the phenomenon of climate change. Basically, climate change is caused, or global warming is caused by something called the greenhouse gas effect, which is actually a natural phenomenon that supports life on Earth as we know it. So greenhouse gases such as CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, among others, occur naturally on Earth and trap heat in the atmosphere, which causes global warming. However, the global warming that we are seeing nowadays is not occurring naturally, but is the direct result of human-made activities. For example, science shows that the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation and other industrial agriculture activities are increasing the atmospheric concentration levels of greenhouse gases like CO2 and methane to levels that were last seen 3 million years ago when the world was warmer due to volcanic activity. So basically, in our lifetime and for millions of years, Earth has not been as hot as it is right now. And the increased temperature that we're seeing on Earth is a direct cause of human activity. As the highest authority on climate change in the world, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, said in one of its reports, it is now unequivocal. So there is no longer doubt that human influence is the cause for climate change. And at current levels, and this is one of the most crucial discoveries of the IPCC, is that current warming levels are already causing widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, in the ocean, in the biosphere, and this is causing adverse impacts and related losses and damages to nature and people. And climate change impacts are also impacting disproportionately communities and people that are already in vulnerable situations and who normally have contributed the least to the climate crisis. Why is this important? Even though it's, I think, becoming more and more obvious, but it is like for everyone, like we're seeing climate change is, I mean, we only need to open our browsers and search for news and we see wildfires, floods, sea level rise, and all kinds of impacts. But it is important to have scientific evidence and reports stating that, you know, current levels of global warming are not safe. And I'm going to address this in a minute. And of course, island nations and coastal communities are some of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Pacific communities are now losing their islands due to rising sea levels, and every single year, more than 50,000 people are being displaced due to climate-induced extreme weather events. Sea levels are also rising faster than scientists anticipated, and weather events like tropical storms, typhoons, hurricanes are also becoming more intense because of climate change. So the increased intensity of these phenomena is also something that is supported by science right now. And at current levels, climate change impacts have already exposed millions of people to acute food insecurity, reduced water availability, and with the largest impacts observed in the global south, mainly in Africa, Asia, South America, small islands, and the Arctic. And we also know that with every increase in global warming, existing impacts will magnify. Why is this important? This is important because if you go to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, and look at the objective, we see that the objective of this convention is to stabilize greenhouse gases in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system, and that such a level should be achieved within a time frame that allows ecosystems to adapt naturally to climate change, to ensure that food production is not threatened, and to enable economic development to proceed in a sustainable manner. However, what we are seeing at the moment is that, as I was telling you, current concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are already causing dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. We're also seeing that ecosystems are not having time to naturally adapt to climate change. Think, for instance, about all the mass bleaching events that we have seen in coral reefs. I think one of the first really big and massive bleaching events that concerned scientists was in 2016. But last year, we also had a worldwide global bleaching event in different parts, especially in tropical waters. So we are already seeing that ecosystems are not really having time to naturally adapt to climate change. And we're also seeing that food security is being threatened around the world due to droughts, loss of natural ecosystems, also like coral reefs is also having an impact on food availability in the oceans, and so on. Like there are many impacts of climate change that are threatening food security. So if we go to the law, let me go back here. One wonders if states aren't already breaching their obligations under the UNFCCC convention. And the IPCC released a very important report in 2018. This is the special report on global warming of 1.5. And what they basically confirmed in this report is that already at 1 degree of global warming, the world was experiencing extreme forms of weather event. Mind you, we are currently at least 1.2 degrees of global warming above pre-industrial levels. And this report also found that global warming of 1.5 poses significant risks to natural and human systems in comparison to a global warming of 1 degree. And that global warming of 1.5 is not safe for most nations, communities, ecosystems, and economic sectors, and that between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees of warming, the probability of exceeding tipping points or points of no return with catastrophic and irreversible impacts on natural and human systems increases. This is relevant because the Paris Agreement, which was ratified in 2016, so 2 years before the release of this 1.5 report, the IPCC established as an objective that states need to hold the increase of global average temperature to well below 2 degrees, and that they need to make efforts to limit temperature increase to 1.5. So this is problematic in the sense that sometimes legal practitioners, courts do not understand that the Paris Agreement needs to be read in light of best available scientific knowledge. This is stated in the preamble of the Paris Agreement. It says that the Paris Agreement, like this conference of the parties, recognizes that the response to climate change needs to be based on best available scientific knowledge. And also in the preamble of the Paris Agreement, it is stated that parties should, when taking action to address climate change, respect, promote, and consider their respective obligations on human rights. So an important consideration is that the Paris Agreement is not lex specialis, and that which means that compliance with Paris Agreement does not exhaust states' obligations under international law and human rights. And it is also important to note that after this agreement was ratified, the parties asked the IPCC to study the impacts of a global warming of 1.5. And this is why the IPCC released the 1.5 report in 2018. So I'm telling you all this because 1.5 is a planetary boundary. It should not be seen as a target, as it is many times framed, but it is a planetary boundary that should not be reached, even less crossed, because of the dangerous consequences that this could have. So really quick, and before I jump into the case of Bonaire, let's recap here. So I have told you that science shows that climate change is human-made and that current levels of warming are not safe, that human rights are, climate change is causing a human rights crisis. And that science also shows us that with every additional increase in warming, impacts will magnify, particularly if global warming reaches or surpasses 1.5 degrees. And just to give you some examples that are specific to island nations. So at current levels of warming, climate change is already affecting settlements and infrastructure. We're already seeing water, food security, economy, and culture being compromised by current levels of warming. But with every additional increase of global warming, the pressure on small islands intensifies. So for example, if temperature continues to rise, coral reefs might disappear. If we reach 1.5 degrees of global warming, up to 90% of coral reefs can disappear due to bleaching. And if we surpass 1.5, we will be looking at the loss of 99% of tropical water coral reefs. And with the loss of coral reefs and other ecosystems, we will see an increase in the vulnerability of small island residents to the impacts of climate change. We will see an impact on food security, clean and fresh water, and also storm protection. Because one of the, for instance, with coral reefs or mangroves, for instance, one of the main services that they provide is storm protection. So without them, if we lose these ecosystems, then islands are more vulnerable to floods. And also, of course, losing ecosystems like coral reefs and all the biodiversity that they sustain would have a severe impact on recreation, tourism, and also cultural traditions and spiritual practices of residents of small islands and island nations. Now, it's also important to note that states have, like, that by becoming parties to international treaties, states assume obligations and duties under international law to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. This, of course, changes or looks different based on the states, right? So they're like, states have different, but they have common but differentiated responsibilities under international law. And also the Human Rights Committee, in its General Comment number 36, stated that climate change is one of the most pressing and serious threats to the ability of present and future generations to enjoy the right to life, among other human rights, and that state parties have a due diligence obligation to take positive measures to prevent foreseeable harm to life. So with that in mind, let's go to the case of Bonaire. And it's also important to note that Bonaire has an important post-colonial context. So Bonaire is not a country. Bonaire is a special municipality of the Netherlands. This means that Bonaireans are Dutch citizens, so citizens of the Netherlands, and that Bonaire is governed not only by the island authority, but also by the Dutch central government. So this is interesting, and this is why Greenpeace Netherlands is a plaintiff in this case that is also led by 8 residents of Bonaire. And as you can imagine, just by geographic location, the impacts of climate change look very different in the European Netherlands and in the Caribbean Netherlands. Sorry, before I continue, it is also important to note that this case is grounded in a movement lawyering approach. This means that, because traditionally, if you look at theories of law, we are trained to believe that lawyers and courts are the catalyst of change. But if you look at history, movements are actually behind the big changes in society. So movement lawyering is based on a theory of change that places people and their experiences at the center of the legal strategies. So the visions of justice of the communities, their experiences and their demands influence the legal strategy. And lawyers and communities have to work in a partnership. So this is not like the lawyers developing the case and then, bringing in the communities, but this has really been developed in consultation, in meaningful consultation with not only the plaintiffs, the individual plaintiffs in the case, but also other residents of Bonaire. And also as a strategy of, as a case of strategic climate litigation, the legal strategy is not the center of everything. It's just one piece of the puzzle. So this case not only relies on, the lawsuit and the court case and the proceedings in the Dutch legal system, but we're also grounded on engagement strategies, communication strategies, political strategies, because in the end, even if we're not victorious in court, we can achieve some victories outside of the court that can be more impactful or just as impactful as a positive case or as a positive outcome before the courts. So let's go back to Bonaire. So as I was telling you, Bonaire is part of the Netherlands, but is located in the Caribbean, very south in the Caribbean, near Venezuela, actually. And Bonaire is a low-lying island, which makes it more vulnerable to sea level rise. And as you can see in this slide, Bonaire is surrounded by coral reef. This is actually one of their main economical activities. So ecotourism is one of the main economical activities in the island. A lot of people rely on tourism to get their livelihoods. And so, of course, the fact that Bonaire is surrounded by coral reefs and is so reliant on coral reefs makes it also more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And in this table that you can see at the bottom of the slide, these are the different reduction emission scenarios that have been identified by the IPCC. So the first scenario is the one that the first emission reduction scenario would limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, although it considers that it might surpass 1.5 temporarily. So this is what scientists call an overshoot of 1.5 degrees, but then the temperature would decrease. So this is the best possible scenario that the IPCC has identified. Now, in this map or the table to the right, you can see what would happen to Bonaire under the different emission reduction scenarios. So the first one to the left is the current coastline. And even under the best possible scenario, which is this other, this second map on the top right, this would be under the best case scenario. So we still see permanent flooding as early as 2050, which basically shows that keeping warming to 1.5 is not safe for Bonaire. It might be safe at some level for the European Netherlands, although we're already seeing at current levels of warming also dangerous climate change impacts here, but it would not be as catastrophic for the European Netherlands to reach 1.5 as it would be very catastrophic for Bonaire to reach the 1.5. Also, as I was telling you, at 1.5, we could be facing the loss of up to 90% of coral reefs, which would be, of course, devastating for a country like Bonaire. And of course, as you know, the emission reduction gets less ambitious, then we see worse impacts for Bonaire. At some point, we could even see the loss of almost half of the island to sea level rise. So Greenpeace Netherlands had to commission a study with the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam because the Netherlands basically has never really studied or looked into how climate change was going to impact Bonaire. And it's important to know that they have done these studies with every other municipality in the country, but not with Bonaire. And this also stands for the other Caribbean municipalities of the Netherlands, which are 3 in total. So the Netherlands historically has always had very discriminatory practices and policies with the Caribbean Netherlands. So this is just basically the tip of the iceberg, and we will address more. I will address more about this in a minute. But when we look at other types of differentiated impacts, we also have to look at the exposure to extreme weather events, such as tropical storms and hurricanes. This is, of course, not a threat in the European Netherlands, but it is a threat in the Caribbean. However, in this part of the Caribbean, hurricanes were not common. Tropical storms, absolutely, but hurricanes were not a thing. And we can see this in the testimony of Oni Emerenciana, which is one of the individual plaintiffs in the Bonaire case. And they are all sharing how the experience of hurricanes is completely new to them. And because they don't have adequate infrastructure, they're also more exposed to the impacts of hurricanes or strong tropical storms. And it is important to note that the lack of adequate infrastructure and housing responds to the poverty levels of Bonaire and other Dutch Caribbean municipalities. So just so you get an idea, in the Caribbean Netherlands, over 40% of the inhabitants live below the poverty line in comparison to 5% in the European Netherlands. So people don't have the resources to rebuild their homes and after these tropical storms, or to better their houses to be more prepared and be more resilient to this kind of extreme weather events. And of course, the government is also not providing them with the resources to rebuild or secure their houses with better materials. So poverty in Bonaire is making people less able to adapt to climate change. We're also seeing increased living costs. So while in the Netherlands, people experience heat waves during the summer only, Bonaire and people in Bonaire are experiencing heat waves constantly, to the point that some of them can no longer work in the same way that they used to, because it's dangerous to be exposed to the sun for those who have to work outside, or some of chronic diseases, chronic illnesses that they have are getting heightened because of the heat, and many other issues that are interfering with people's ability to work as they used to. Kids are also being highly impacted by heat. They can no longer play on the streets, and this is also keeping kids more sheltered and isolated in their homes, which is also having impacts on their mental health, on their physical health, and so on. So one of the plaintiffs, Helen, she also shares how they need to drink more water, they need to use air conditioning. In the past, they didn't even have air conditionings, and now they need to have air conditionings because it's getting hotter, and the energy bills have almost doubled. And this is also important because even though Bonaire is a Dutch municipality, they don't have the same minimum wage as people in the European Netherlands, even though life in Bonaire is actually more expensive than in the European Netherlands. But the wage difference between the European Netherlands and Bonaire is just enormous. And also people in Bonaire don't have the same social security system, and they don't have access to the same protection or level of protection that the government offers to the residents and Dutch citizens of the Netherlands in Europe. It's also important to note that this is all exacerbated by the fact that Dutch Caribbean municipalities are the only ones without an adaptation plan. So the Netherlands has designed an adaptation plan for every single municipality in Europe, except for the Caribbean municipalities. So of course, people have always felt very abandoned by the government in Bonaire, but they also understand that the government has an obligation to protect, fulfill, and to guarantee their human rights. So they decided to take the government to court, and they launched a lawsuit against the government on January of 2024, basically claiming that the Dutch state is committing an unlawful act because it's failing to implement adequate climate adaptation and mitigation measures to protect the human rights of people in Bonaire. The plaintiffs are also invoking the European Convention on Human Rights, specifically Articles 2 and 8. I will get into that in a minute. And they're also invoking the prohibition of discrimination under Article 14 of the European Convention and Article 27, which protects the right to culture under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So Articles 2 and 8 so Article 2 of the European Convention protects the right to life, and Article 8 protects the right to family life, to private and family life. So what the plaintiffs are arguing is that heat and drought have a significant impact on Bonaire's livability. So basically, with increased warming, Bonaire could become unlivable. And they are also highlighting the impact that drought and the changing weather is already having in Bonaire, and how this is gonna get worse as global warming increases. Under Article 27, they are highlighting how the loss of coral reefs could impact the economic, social, and cultural rights of Bonaireans. They could have this could have an impact on their cultural traditions, such as harvest festivals, fishing, agriculture, and also because of sea level rise, places of cultural importance could disappear. And this would, of course, impact their, cultural heritage and traditions. And with the prohibition of discrimination under the European Convention of Human Rights, states are not allowed to discriminate people under their jurisdiction on any grounds. And in the Netherlands, legally, they are allowed to have a differentiated treatment between Europe and the Caribbean Netherlands. However, such differentiated treatment should not impair the rights protected under the European Convention, and this is exactly what is happening. The European Court has stated that Article 14 can be violated when a state treats people who are in similar situations differently without providing an objective and reasonable justification for this. So because the inhabitants of Bonaire are Dutch citizens, and just like European Dutch citizens, they are impacted by the consequences of climate change. We are arguing that they are on a similar situation as European Dutch citizens. And that the Netherlands is basically discriminating against them because of their place of residence. And we're also highlighting that Bonaireans are, of course, a minority within the Netherlands, and that states have an obligation to protect the groups that are in a vulnerable position and that could be disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. As I was telling you before, the lack of an adaptation plan is one of the main grounds of discrimination, because as I was telling you, every single municipality in the Netherlands has an adaptation plan except for the Caribbean municipalities, and there is really no reasonable or justifiable excuse for this differentiated treatment. So the plaintiffs are, the demands are basically twofold. One is regarding adaptation. So the plaintiffs are demanding that an adaptation plan is put in place and is executed in consultation with the people from Bonaire. And this doesn't mean then that the same plan that is being applied in Rotterdam has to be now or should be now applied to Bonaire, because it would not work. This means that the state has to talk to the plaintiffs, talk to the residents of Bonaire, understand what are their needs, their wants, and what is necessary for them to be able to adapt to climate change. And a vital thing in this is just social justice. So in this case, what plaintiffs want and need to be able to adapt to climate change is better wages, better infrastructure, better social security, to really significantly improve their ability to adapt to climate change. Of course, other measures are also very necessary to prevent coastal erosion and so on, but social justice is a huge component of our adaptation demand in the lawsuit. And there's also a mitigation component in the demands, which is basically that the Netherlands is not on track to keep their climate commitments at the moment. But even if they were, their climate commitments are not really aligned to the 1.5 limit. And as I was telling you, 1.5 is not even safe. They should be doing more. They should be striving to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees, but they're not even doing enough to keep it to 1.5 or even above. Because if every single country in the world had the same climate targets as the Netherlands, global warming would reach even 3 degrees by the end of this century. So they're clearly not doing enough. And they're also not doing enough considering their historical responsibility, considering the fossil fuel industry like Shell, that, has contributed so much to climate change, and that until very recently had its operations and its headquarter was in the Netherlands. And also, of course, they have a lot of economical capacity and technology to do their part. So one common argument that we always hear from defendants in climate cases is that they're only one state, and that one state cannot fix climate change because this is a global problem. And this is true. However, every state needs to do their part, but each fair share of the states looks differently depending on, as I was telling you, their historical responsibility, their capability, and also the carbon budget that they have. So the amount of carbon that they have already emitted and what we have left basically before we reach this limit of 1.5. So what we argue is that the states that have polluted the most and have now the most capacity to transition to renewable sources have a higher responsibility to do so, because developing states have less resources, less technology, and therefore they would need to rely on fossil fuel, a fossil fuel economy for a longer time than developed and highly industrialized states. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so why is this case relevant for other island nations? First of all, because this case could set 1.5 degrees as a fundamental threshold for island nations and island nations or island municipalities such as Bonaire. Because it shows that not only mitigation is necessary or that only adaptation is necessary in isolation, but that both measures are necessary when it comes to preventing the worst impacts of climate change, that climate adaptation requires social justice, and of course that many of the findings can be applicable not the future findings of the court in this case, and also all the research that has already been done to substantiate the lawsuit that we presented. We think that it could be relevant for other Caribbean islands and just island nations in general. Now, super quick, I want to talk about other initiatives led or supported by island nations, because of course the Netherlands has this, Bonaire, is part of the Netherlands, and there are many countries in the Caribbean that are independent. But so I wanted to mention other initiatives also to inspire maybe some ideas and some actions from you. So there was like a very exciting case that was brought before the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines. And this was a case against 47 carbon mayors, which are fossil fuel companies that have contributed significantly to climate change, and that now we have enough scientific evidence to link them to the impacts of climate change that are resulting in human rights violations. So in 2014, the Climate Accountability Institute found or released a report that found that just 90 companies caused 2/3 of human-made global warming emissions since the 1800s. And very recently, it was also found that 57 companies are linked to 80% of greenhouse gas emissions since the ratification of the Paris Agreement. So it's not getting any better. And this inquiry was brought by survivors of the super typhoon Haiyan, which was one of the most powerful tropical cyclones ever recorded in the Philippines that killed at least 6,000 people and destroyed property and lives of countless others. And 32 individuals that had been survived this event, together with Greenpeace Philippines and other civil society organizations, took this case before the Philippines Commission on Human Rights, basically asking them if these companies, these fossil fuel companies, could be found liable under international law. for their contribution to climate change. And what the Human Rights Commission found was that, first of all, the carbon mayors' contribution to climate change is quantifiable and substantial. It also found, and this is also very important, that these carbon mayors had early awareness and knowledge. And when we say early awareness, is that we mean since the 1950s. Their own scientists were telling them what would happen if they would continue with their business activity. They correctly predicted all the impacts that we are seeing today. They correctly predicted sea level rise, increased intensity of extreme weather events, and so on. These people, these companies, even insured themselves decades ago against sea level rise. So they knowingly decided to continue with their operations, even though they knew the impacts that these would have on human rights and human survival. And they also willfully obfuscated climate science because they invested thousands and millions of dollars in creating scientific uncertainty and spreading lies about climate science and creating doubt in the consumers that, really climate change was natural and not caused by, the fossil fuel production and combustion. And also the commission found that because of all of this evidence, carbon mayors could be found, or that there could be a basis for liability against the carbon mayors. Also, a very, very nice initiative that was brought by island states was the advisory opinion before ITLOS. So this was a case. So Antigua and Barbuda in 2022 created the Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change and International Law, which is known as COSIS. And they submitted a request for an advisory opinion before ITLOS, where they asked the tribunal to specify what were the obligations of state parties under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, specifically in relation to the obligation to prevent, reduce, and control marine pollution, and to protect and preserve the marine environment in face of climate change. And the tribunal found, and the advisory opinion was published in May of this year, they found that effectively anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions count as or constitute pollution of the marine environment under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. Why? Because basically the greenhouse gas emissions entered the ocean because the ocean is one of the biggest carbon sinks, so it absorbs not only heat, but also CO2. So the ocean is getting warmer, but also it's getting more acid. And this constitutes pollution because of all the negative effects that it has in the marine environment. And it also claimed that climate change represents an existential threat and raises serious human rights concerns. And the tribunal also found that under the obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment, states have a due diligence obligation to take all the necessary measures to prevent or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And and I think I will leave it to that in the interest of time. But before I finish, I also want to raise awareness that we have a very, very important advisory opinion coming up this December. This was also an initiative led by Pacific Island students. They got together and they basically talked to a lot of island nations who then went before, during the UN General Assembly, convinced all the other states to raise a question before the International Court of Justice about what are states' obligations under or in face of the climate crisis. And the hearings in the ICJ are scheduled to begin on the 2nd of December. This could be the most important advisory opinion on climate change. Also, very recently in April, we had hearings before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. One of the sessions took place in Barbados because they're very concerned about the impacts of climate change. So they invited the court to hold the hearings there. I had the honor to be and the privilege to be during those hearings, and this advisory opinion is also going to be very important because it's also going to further clarify what are states' obligations in light of the climate crisis under the American Convention on Human Rights. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave it to that in the interest of time. And please, if you have any questions, if there's anything that wasn't clear, let me know. I'm happy to address them. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria, Alejandra. Persons, this is your opportunity to ask your questions. So far we have 2 questions in the chat. Emma, I know that you probably included a disclaimer. Should I still ask your first question?
Yeah. Hi everybody. Good evening. It's incredibly heavy rain here in Kingston, so it feels kind of climate change-ish. Anyway, my first well, this was a very basic question, and I don't know how the Dutch government has been able to avoid presenting an adaptation plan for, you know, the municipalities which are made up of their citizens, how they've managed to get away with not presenting an adaptation plan, and that this was, I mean, I thought this was required by the UN FCCC. But my second question was also, can community groups or you know, civil society organizations, such as JET, for example, sue carbon majors for disinformation or greenwashing on the grounds of climate justice, if that makes sense.
Can you repeat your last question, sorry?
Can civil society organizations or NGOs and so on actually sue carbon majors, the people that you were talking about who have been aware since the 1950s of what they were doing to the climate? Could community groups, for example, sue carbon majors for disinformation or like greenwashing, you know, all this information that they all these this sort of PR that they put out, which is very misleading and can cause a great deal of confusion and harm actually on the ground, and how can that you know, on the grounds of climate justice? Yes,
so the answer is yes, they can, and we already have a strategy that with Shell. So yes, the answer is yes, and in this case of any, the case is brought by Greenpeace Italy, another civil society organization that is called Recommend, but also 11 citizens of Italy who are seeing their properties impacted by coastal erosion and sea level rise, among other, you know, they're also experiencing other impacts, wildfires, heat waves, and so on. But it has a very strong component on climate justice. The case is at the moment suspended because we're waiting for the Supreme Court of Italy to determine if climate cases can be litigated in Italy. It's a bit crazy at the moment. But basically, this litigation is happening already. And we're seeing a rise on climate litigation against corporations. So the answer is yes, and we need more, basically, and also more strategies that are led by communities against these big carbon mayors.
Thank you very much. So it's not only in the global south that these issues are arising more and more. I mean, I'm just thinking about what's happening in the US after the Hurricane Helene, and so one is more likely to see these kind of cases, like, you know, worldwide in developed countries as well. Do you think?
Yeah, I think that is very so this is why I think the advisory opinions are so important, because I think that they could open the doors for litigation in the future led by communities in the global south. Of course, I mean, it's I think that it's more it's easier to target global north countries because of their historical responsibility, all the emissions that they have produced, the huge industry, the fossil industry that they have, the fact that all the carbon mayors are headquartered in the north. So when you look at jurisdictions, it makes sense to bring these cases in the global north. But there are, for instance, now there is a community in Indonesia that filed. So they are from Indonesia, and they filed a lawsuit against Holcim, which is one of the biggest cement producers in Switzerland. And this is because the Swiss law allows for foreign plaintiffs to start lawsuits under their jurisdiction. Like basically the proceedings under Switzerland made this possible. And they are suing Holcim because of their contribution to climate change. And basically you draw the link. So you know how much Holcim, the percentage that they have contributed to climate change. Then you see the impacts that these communities are experiencing, and you draw like a line. And that is how you, how they are targeting this corporation. Also, there's a very interesting case led by a farmer in Peru against the biggest energy company in Germany. So they're also suing in Germany. And this case is also ongoing. And it's about the loss of glaciers in Peru. So it is happening. And I do think that, I mean, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, over 200 communities gave their testimonies. And what they're looking is to also hold their global south states accountable, and to also get them to act and to protect their rights, but also understanding that there is a differentiated responsibility between states in the global north and states in the global south. But yeah, basically it's also possible in South Africa. You also see a lot of lawsuits, all over the globe. Really, really cool initiatives led by communities based in the global south.
All right. Well, go ahead, Teresa.
I have a question. Thank you so much for that presentation. I am not a lawyer, as you know, but I am interested a little bit in the movement lawyering approach and trying to understand a little bit about maybe some of the challenges. And it might be a bit broad, but if you could just expand a little bit more on that.
Yes, of course, happy to. So yeah, movement lawyering, as I was telling you, centers the legal strategy on the realities of communities. Movement lawyering also, so practitioners of movement lawyering, such as myself, we believe that the impacted communities are the best placed to define their problems and the solutions that they need. Because we also have this, especially, I don't know, I don't know how is it in Jamaica, but at least in Colombia, there's always like a very vertical relationship between lawyers and communities. So movement lawyering tries to balance it out. And there's, of course, a lot of challenges with this. And it really depends between each case. But sometimes, because you have such a power dynamic between the legal team and the communities, it's hard to build trust, first of all. So movement lawyering takes years. You really need to develop a relationship with the communities to be able to work in a horizontal way and in a non-transactional way. Second of all, I think that another challenge is the distrust that communities can have with some organizations. In the case of Greenpeace, didn't always do the right thing with communities. And in the past, I mean, Greenpeace is changing a lot, but it was way more white and way more, like Western than it is now. So indigenous peoples, for instance, normally don't like to work with Greenpeace. This is starting to change because people inside of Greenpeace is also changing, and we're changing our approaches to law, but really understanding also that, you know, we might have a difficult past and that we need to own, you know, the things that we did wrong and approach the communities with respect is very important. Also, another very important thing of movement lawyering is that because it works in a horizontal way, the communities not only have a substantial say on what happens legally, but also with their communications and the political strategies and so on. There are communities that are super organized. They have already very strong communication platforms, and they don't need a big organization to speak for them, but they might make use to the platform that these organizations provide. So in many cases, we do that. Like, we don't really speak for them or are even involved in the litigation directly. So we're not necessarily plaintiffs in the case, but we provide the communities with the resources that they need to go to court. So we pay for the lawyers, we pay the court fees, we provide all the legal assistance, we provide a platform or amplification of communications and so on. But some communities are very well organized and they have the time and the resources to take care of the cases themselves. And we respect that and basically invite that if it's possible, because we think that if they are, the more in charge the communities are of the case, the better, because we think that that's what's really gonna change not only their lives, but also the systems, the broken systems that we live in. So I don't know if you've heard the case of the Klimasignorinen. This was a case led by elderly women of Switzerland. These are a privileged type of community because they're all pensioned women that have economical resources to tour Europe, take care of their communications, create their own organization. But these women have changed climate law forever. We just had a massive, so Greenpeace Switzerland and Greenpeace International, we supported the case, but we're not plaintiffs in the case. We just supported their initiatives. And as I said, provided the resources to pay for the legal fees and so on. And of course, provided also more strategic and specialized advice, because most of them are not lawyers. And we won before the European Court, and now climate protection is a human right in Europe. And this was a victory of the Klimasignorinen, which are women 70 plus. So it's really incredible. So yeah, as I was saying, like, you know, with them, the challenges were different because these are, you know, it was easier to have a horizontal way of working with them because of the economical resources that they have. They were highly educated and so on. But when you work with communities that do not have these same privileges, then you also need to be more aware of the power dynamic that you have. And one thing that we really like to do is to have workshops where they learn from us, but we also learn from them. So we, for instance, provide trainings on know your rights, because, you know, law is very technical, so they might not know about these, but we also might not know about all the biodiversity laws that has taken place in their territory and all the climate impacts that they're experiencing. So we also create spaces to learn from each other and to build like one new story, as a colleague of mine that is a storytelling expert likes to call it, the story of us. So we try to create like a new chapter of partnership with the communities. This, of course, sounds very pretty. In practice, is hard and it takes a lot of time, but it's possible and is very rewarding as a lawyer.
Thanks so much for that.
So following on Teresa's questions and your response, Maria, so just for person, just in the event that someone's probably thinking this, because you've mentioned that Greenpeace International and Greenpeace Netherlands, that they provided that support. If, you know, we have local attorneys that are interested in probably bringing that kind of action, would Greenpeace International be able to provide support to Jamaican attorneys or even attorneys within the Caribbean?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we don't have a presence in the Caribbean at the moment. So yeah, we don't have a Greenpeace office in any Caribbean country. But one thing that we're doing right now is creating a network of impacted communities. So we're working with coastal communities that have already been displaced by climate change or are suffering severe impacts of the climate crisis. And the idea is, to create a network of communities and also of legal practitioners in this region. We might not be able to provide direct support because, so basically at Greenpeace International, our clients, so as a lawyer, I work at the legal unit of Greenpeace International. My clients are the organizations of Greenpeace. So I would not be able to support you directly, but we would be able to connect you with other NGOs that can provide that direct support, and we can work with you as partners and amplify communications, initiatives, strategies, and so on. So yeah, it's not as straightforward, but it's not impossible either. And as I said, there is already a network of organizations that can do this. So
Okay.
yes, I mean, if anyone is interested, let's talk, of course.
Please feel free, Maria, to put your email or anything in the chat. Or you could probably send us something so that we can circulate it after to the attendees, so if they want to connect with you, that they can. Just another question concerning the litigation itself, the initial process. I'm curious to find out, is it that these community persons approached Greenpeace, or is it that Greenpeace, who sought who to have this this litigation started?
Yes. So with Bonaire, something very interesting. Well, with Bonaire, not something sad happens, which is that in many cases, residents have been approached by international organizations, but they basically have used them. So it has been a very transactional approach. They want something from them, they use them for their pictures, their campaigns, whatever. So the islanders don't really trust that organizations. However, with Greenpeace, it was different. So we first, and this is a very complex situation, because they're also so used to being so abandoned by the Dutch government that they really never thought about taking action against it. Like, they were not even exploring it. So I don't recall if it was someone from the community that approached Greenpeace Netherlands, or if it was Greenpeace Netherlands approaching people in Bonaire. But we got in touch with, so Greenpeace Netherlands got in touch with a community mobilizer. So basically with 3 very young people who were very concerned about their future in Bonaire, and they wanted to do something. And then they started to work together, and they started to create the case. And then campaigners of Greenpeace Netherlands went to Bonaire to talk to the people, to see the impacts of climate change. And then we got experts engaged. So they would explain us, about why. As I think it was Emma who was asking, like, how is it possible that, the Netherlands has been able to, discriminate Bonaire and other Caribbean municipalities for this long with no consequences. So we had the same question. So that's how it all started. But from the very beginning, it has been done in partnership with youth from Bonaire. And we, inside of the Greenpeace Netherlands team, we have two community mobilizer that is based in Bonaire, or 2 community mobilizers based in Bonaire, and another community expert also from Bonaire who lives in the Netherlands, and he is also working at Greenpeace at the moment and in the campaign.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maria. Are there any other questions? You can feel free to unmute your mic, or you can raise your hand. Right, so while persons are still deciding, I have one more question, Maria, because I love the map that you showed. Is it that that was information or data that was obtained locally, as in within Bonaire, or was that outsourced?
So you mean the map that shows
The current situation and the future for the coastline?
Yes. So it was one of the things that we discovered, which we thought was shocking, is that the Netherlands had no information about how climate change had already impacted, was impacting, or would impact Bonaire or any other Dutch Caribbean municipality, even though they are the most vulnerable in the Netherlands to climate change. And then we commissioned this study with the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam. And basically it was researchers based in Amsterdam, but they used data from other scientific institutes in Bonaire. And so it was commissioned, and it was done by a university in the European Netherlands. But we did use information, and also actually, and that I don't recall if they actually consulted with the plaintiffs, but they did gather information about also the cultural heritage of Bonaire and what it meant for people. So, and I mean, I'm only, I cannot say this for sure, but I would guess that they had to do some field work in Bonaire in order to reach to those conclusions. But yeah, this was commissioned by Greenpeace, this study.
Okay. So I see a hand raised. Peter, please feel free to unmute.
Hi, good night. So I do have a question. Seeing that work has been done with Bonaire and there are other Dutch Caribbean countries, is there any plans to move the efforts to try and protect them in the same way that efforts are being made to protect Bonaire?
Yes. So the idea would be to use the precedent of this case, because if the court finds that the Dutch government has actively discriminated against Bonaire, this same principle would apply to the other Dutch Caribbean municipalities. And basically, they could not then discriminate the other Caribbean municipalities and not implement an adaptation plan if they're going to do it for Bonaire. So this would have an impact all over the Caribbean Netherlands. And yeah, and then we would see from there. But we are also in contact with communities from the other two Dutch Caribbean municipalities, which are way smaller than Bonaire. And the idea would be to also bring justice to them and to address also their needs, which are very similar to the ones that Bonaireans have.
Great, thank you, Maria, and thank you for the question, Peter Gay. Are there any other questions? Right, so there being no other questions.
I just have a very basic question, but what is the one issue that climate change issue in Bonaire that stands out? I got my headphones. That stands out. Is it coral reefs or sea level rise, or what is the burning issue for Bonaire that people were engaged with? I was wondering, is Bonaire made of limestone or coral? I'm not quite sure, or sand. But I was just trying to imagine the environmental impacts on the ground and what people see, the residents of Bonaire, what do they see as the most pressing climate change issue?
I think to them, I would say there are really 3 pressing climate issues at the moment. I don't know what, like, they always mention that they have coral in the soil. So I don't know if it's made of coral, but I'm not sure about that, like how to answer that question. But one of the most pressing issues are heat. So some of the people in Bonaire are even having to sleep in their cars, because for them it's just cheaper to like turn on their car with their AC on and sleep there in the night than to be at home, because it's getting very expensive to keep the ACs all night. Some of them didn't even have ACs until some years ago. So it's really increasing their life expenses. So that's one. Another one is floods. So Bonaire is very dry. So when it rains, the soil doesn't really absorb the water, so it stays there. So they have a lot of floods. The roads get blocked, roads to hospitals get blocked, kids can no go to school. So that's another huge problem that they have. Also this same stands for hurricanes, like tropical storms are also getting more intense. And also droughts. Droughts is the third main issue that they have, which is impacting agriculture. So they can no longer have their harvest festivals because everything is dying. And for them to maintain and sustain their gardens, where they used to have, where they used to cultivate several things, now they need to use too much water. So this also increasing the prices of water. So it's very hard to see this as just one issue, because it's very interconnected and intersectional.
Yeah.
But I would say these are the main struggles that they have.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you as well. And I'm definitely inspired at the fact that Greenpeace took on that intersectional approach, in that they engage stakeholders in having this litigation done, instead of the typical attorney-client relationship, but they expanded it more and made it more of, as you had said, a movement. Definitely allows for something, but I say that has a long-lasting effect. I definitely believe that you may be moving on to something more. Is that the case?
Can you repeat the last part, Courtney? Sorry?
That after the findings of the court, or depending on the findings of the court, you may be moving on to something greater for Bonaire?
Yeah, so we need to see what happens. We're only now at the admissibility stage. And this, I think we think that it could take 2-3 years. But if, for instance, the courts would rule negatively, so they would rule against the plaintiffs and Greenpeace Netherlands, we would seek an application before the European Court of Human Rights. So that's legal, like the legal strategy. But right now we're also looking to bring people from Bonaire to COP30 and to really create a network of climate impacted communities for them, to make demands before international court. So yes, I mean, we have like a lot of ideas, but we're taking it step by step. We're also looking forward to see what is established in the advisory opinions of the ICJ and the Inter-American Court, and see, what opportunities arise also from those decisions. So yeah, we shall see. But definitely, this is also something of in general litigation, but also movement lawyering, understanding that you are committed to the communities before you launch the case, during the case, and after. It's not like we won by. No, it's really like also to oversee and to support them during the implementation of the ruling, if it's positive, and so on. So this is we have a long road ahead, basically. With
definitely years ahead. All right. Thank you so much, Maria. And thank you everyone for joining to hear this presentation. And so I now hand over to Teresa.
Hi, thank you so much for that. Mario, there's so much we can take away from it. I think that as a non-lawyer, I've been, coming up with things in my mind about what needs to be done. One thing we're learning, and I think as the lawyers here they know this, that evidence and causation, very important for successful litigation. something that I don't know if we're effectively doing here in Jamaica in terms of, collecting the relevant evidence. And I take note of the whole point about movement lawyering, that approach. That's something that is not easy to do. And it's something that is not cheap to do either. Especially the last point that you ended on, which is, in terms of, what happens after the fact, after you're finished. And I think what this highlights is, for us here in Jamaica, is this whole issue of access to justice, which is, it's expensive. It's there are a whole lot of issues related to taking legal action. Apart from costs, there's access to information. So sometimes you want to take legal action, but the very information that you need to take that legal action is sometimes so locked up under all of these layers of law. Well, layers of saying, it's confidential and you can't get access to it, and that has a big issue. That has a big impact. And I think one of the things that going forward, I would love to know about in terms of, I'd love to see groups like ourselves at JET, like young groups, young people, consider taking legal action, but also having the support of legal lawyers who would be willing to support cases. And this is something that is never easy. It's actually sometimes easier to go international to find support than it is to find support locally, especially because you need the financial support as well. So I am really grateful for this presentation, Maria. I'm really grateful for adding the little, I think this has been a follow-on for a previous seminar. And if any of you who have been present tonight think that there is more to be learned, there is more information that you'd like, we're very, open to suggestions. We also had sent a link in the chat, and we're requesting that you complete that. And as Courtney had indicated, for those who may have been late to the session, this is accredited, and we'll be communicating this presentation has been accredited by the GLC, and we'll be communicating with you in terms of the credits. So I will now hand over, but once again, thank you so much for making the time this evening. I know it's super late for you where you are, Maria. And now I'll hand over to Courtney. I think that's when you'll just do the final wrap.
Yes. So again, thank you. And just for your information, for persons who are not able to complete our evaluation survey, we will be sending the link for the recording as well as the link for this survey. We ask that you complete it. We need it in relation to our submission to General Legal Counsel. And this email will also include pertinent information concerning the number of credits and the classification for it. Thank you again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again at another climate litigation event or function. And thanks again, Maria, for your time and your information. We truly appreciate it. And please, everyone, if you have any questions or even if you want to, make any connections, we welcome it. Maria sent her email, and we'll also provide her email her email address in our email to you so that you can have that connection. All right. So thanks again, and have a wonderful night, everyone. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have